It is 10,000 BC. For 200,000 years, your ancestors have followed the herds. They've slept under stars, tracked migrating animals across continents, and built lives of remarkable freedom, moving when resources moved, belonging to no single place on Earth. Then someone kneels beside a patch of wild grain. They watch the seeds fall, and they have an idea. What happens next is not just a change in how humans eat. It is the single most consequential decision in the history of our species. And some historians argue it was also the biggest mistake we ever made. Welcome to ChronoVault, where we bring history back to life. I'm your guide through deep time. And every episode we pull one thread from human history and follow it all the way to you. Today's thread? The agricultural revolution. The moment our ancestors stopped chasing food and started growing it. It sounds like pure progress. It wasn't. And by the end of this video, you will never look at a loaf of bread the same way again. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell. We upload every single day, covering all of human history. And last time, we traced the greatest journey ever taken. Humans walking out of Africa to conquer the entire planet. If you missed it, go watch it right after this. But first, let's go farming. To understand the agricultural revolution, you need to understand what came before it, because the story the textbooks tell you is wrong. For roughly 200,000 years, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. And for most of history, we've told that story with a slight sense of condescension, as if those people were simply waiting for someone smart enough to invent farming. As if a life of hunting and gathering was a problem waiting to be solved. The evidence says something very different. Archaeological and anthropological research on modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups that still live this way today, suggests that hunter-gatherers typically worked only 20 to 30 hours per week to meet their nutritional needs. They had varied, protein-rich diets. Their skeletons show they were taller and healthier than the first farmers. They had more leisure time, and they faced far less risk of epidemic disease than settled populations. So why did they change? The answer lies not in human ambition but in the most powerful force in history. A changing climate. Around 12,000 years ago, Earth's last great ice age came to an end. As temperatures warmed, the landscape changed dramatically. In the region we now call the Fertile Crescent, a crescent-shaped arc of land running through modern-day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel, wild grasses began to flourish. Wheat, barley, rye, and our ancestors, smart, adaptable, deeply observant people who had been watching the natural world for millennia, began to notice patterns. Seeds fell, seeds grew, and slowly, over generations, some groups began doing something subtly different. They began to stay. The earliest confirmed evidence of intentional agriculture comes from the Fertile Crescent, dated to around 10,000 BC, just as the climate was warming and wild grain was becoming abundant. Here, in villages like Ain Ghazal and Jericho, what would become some of the world's first towns, our ancestors began doing something revolutionary. They began selecting the best seeds from the plants they harvested and deliberately replanting them. Not just once, not by accident, but systematically, season after season. This is the core act of agriculture. Human selection. By choosing which plants to grow, our ancestors were guiding evolution itself. Over centuries, the wild emmer wheat of the Fertile Crescent became something new. A domesticated crop, with larger seeds, on a stalk that didn't scatter them on the wind. The plant had been redesigned for human harvest. Animals followed the same path. Goats were first domesticated in the Zagros Mountains of what is now Iran around 10,000 BC. Sheep, cattle, and pigs followed in rapid succession. For the first time in human history, our ancestors didn't just hunt animals. They owned them. And as communities planted crops and raised animals, something else happened. They stopped moving. A hunter-gatherer can't carry much. Mobility is survival. But a farmer is different. A farmer has invested months of labor in that field. And you cannot move a field. So our ancestors built the first permanent settlements. And the world changed. Now here's where the story takes a turn that most people completely miss. Because the agricultural revolution didn't happen once. It happened at least 7 times. Independently. Across the globe. While our ancestors in the Fertile Crescent were cultivating wheat and barley. People in China were independently domesticating rice in the Yangtze River Valley around 7000 BC. Simultaneously. In New Guinea, people were cultivating taro and bananas. In sub-Saharan Africa, sorghum and millet were being farmed independently. In Mexico, ancient Mesoamericans were developing maize, what we call corn, from a wild grass called teosinte that looks almost nothing like the corn you know. In the Andes, people were domesticating potatoes and quinoa. The same fundamental insight, that you could grow food rather than just find it, emerged in multiple places around the world, from people who had never been in contact with each other. That's not a coincidence. That's climate change creating similar conditions and similar opportunities across the globe. Simultaneously. And what emerged from all these independent revolutions wasn't just different crops. It was different civilizations. But what happened next is something most history books leave out entirely. Because the agricultural revolution, at first, made life worse. Most people think the shift to farming was an upgrade. The truth is far more complicated. And when you understand what the evidence actually shows, the whole story changes. Archaeologists who study the skeletal remains from early farming settlements have found something disturbing. Compared to hunter-gatherers, the first farmers were shorter. They had more evidence of malnutrition and vitamin deficiency. Signs of a less varied diet. They suffered from new diseases. Early farming villages were crowded. Their waste contaminated their water. And living in close proximity to domesticated animals created new pathways for infectious disease. To jump from animals to humans. Most historians now believe that diseases like measles, smallpox, and influenza first emerged in early agricultural communities. Early farmers also worked more, not less, where a hunter-gatherer might secure their week's calories in a few days. A farmer worked from dawn to dusk planting, weeding, harvesting, grinding, and storing grain. The physical labor was relentless. And then there's the most uncomfortable consequence. Inequality. Hunter-gatherer societies are remarkably egalitarian. When you can't store much and you move constantly, there's little opportunity to accumulate more than your neighbors. But farming changed that calculation entirely. A farmer could produce a surplus. And a surplus could be stored. And stored food meant some people could accumulate power over others in a way that had never been possible before. The first armies, the first tax collectors, the first slaves, all of them emerge in the archaeological record in the same places and at the same times as intensive agriculture. Farming didn't just change how humans ate. It created the conditions for hierarchy, exploitation, and war at a scale that hunter-gatherer societies never experienced. And this is the part that still gives me chills. Because despite all of this, despite the disease, despite the harder work, despite the shortened lives and the new inequalities, farming spread, not because people always chose it, but because farming populations grew. More food, even if less varied, meant more children could survive to adulthood. Farming communities grew faster than hunting communities. And larger populations, even if individually less healthy, could outcompete and absorb smaller ones. Agriculture didn't conquer the world because it was better for the people who practiced it. It spread because it was better for population growth. And populations that grew larger eventually displaced those that didn't. By roughly 5,000 years ago, agriculture had transformed the world. The first cities, Uruk, Jericho, and soon, the ancient cities of China and Egypt, were all built on the foundation of stored grain. The first writing systems in the world were not invented to tell stories or record history. They were invented to keep track of grain inventories and taxation. The first governments existed primarily to manage agricultural surpluses, distribute food, and tax the farmers who produced it. Every civilization we study, Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, the Indus Valley, ancient China, is, at its core, an agricultural civilization. The cities, the armies, the religions, the art, the law, the philosophy, all of it rests on the foundation laid by the first farmers who bent down beside a wild grain plant and decided to stay. And today, despite everything, despite our global trade networks and industrial food systems, virtually all of modern humanity's calories still come from just a handful of the crops first domesticated in those ancient agricultural revolutions: wheat, rice, maize, potatoes, barley, the same plants our ancestors chose 10,000 years ago. The agricultural revolution is not ancient history. It is the foundation of the world you live in right now. Every city you've ever been to exists because agriculture created food surpluses large enough to free some people from farming entirely, so they could become architects, soldiers, merchants, priests, artists, scientists, and programmers. Every institution you've ever interacted with, government, religion, education, banking, law, emerged from the social structures that agriculture made necessary. Even the diseases you've been vaccinated against, measles, smallpox, flu, are, in an important sense, gifts from agriculture. They jumped from domesticated animals to humans in early farming communities, and our immune systems spent thousands of years learning to cope with them. And the environmental challenges we face today, deforestation, soil degradation, water scarcity, climate change accelerated by land use, all trace back to our decision, 12,000 years ago, to reshape the natural world in order to feed ourselves. We are an agricultural species. That choice, made by our ancestors in the Fertile Crescent and independently in China and Mexico and sub-Saharan Africa, defines virtually everything about how we live, how we govern ourselves, how we get sick, and how we've altered the planet. Understanding the agricultural revolution is not optional. It's essential context for understanding everything that comes after. Before we go, 3 facts from today's episode that will genuinely stop people in their tracks. Fact number 1. Hunter-gatherers were healthier than the first farmers and worked fewer hours. For most of history, we've treated farming as an obvious upgrade. The physical evidence, bone density, skeletal health, height, signs of nutritional deficiency, tells a different story. The transition to farming was not a step up in individual well-being. It was a trade-off. More people surviving, each living harder lives. Fact number 2. Agriculture was invented independently at least 7 times, across 3 continents, by peoples who had absolutely no contact with each other. In the Fertile Crescent, China, New Guinea, Sub-Saharan Africa, Mexico, South America, and possibly more, the same insight, you can grow food, emerged separately because the same post-Ice Age conditions created similar opportunities around the world. It wasn't that one genius invented farming. It was that the whole world was ready for it simultaneously. Fact number 3. All modern crops, every grain, vegetable, and fruit that feeds the world today descend from approximately 30 wild plant species that were first domesticated in those ancient agricultural revolutions. 30 species. Out of the roughly 250,000 plant species that exist on Earth, our ancestors chose 30 of them, and we have fed billions of people on that narrow foundation ever since. And honestly, that last one changed the way I think about how fragile our food system actually is. History is wilder than any fiction, and we've barely scratched the surface. The agricultural revolution didn't just change what humans ate, it changed what humans were. It made us city dwellers, taxpayers, disease survivors, and civilization builders. Every great empire, every cathedral, every scientific discovery, every political revolution, all of it built on grain. Which part of this story surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Was it the hunter-gatherer health data? The 7 independent inventions? Or the fact that all our crops come from just 30 wild species? Subscribe to ChronoVault and hit the bell. We cover all of human history, one story at a time. New video drops tomorrow. Next time on ChronoVault, the first cities, specifically Catalhoyuk, one of the world's oldest cities. A place where thousands of people lived in a city with no streets, no central government, and no hierarchy. And archaeologists still can't fully explain how it worked. I'll see you then.